Today's show is brought to you by CBT Nuggets. You know how much we value ongoing education on the Cloudcast, and CBT Nuggets is exactly what Aaron and I wish we had when we were trying to get our certification early in our careers. CBT Nuggets is all about bringing a personalized touch to learning about cloud computing, virtualization, networking, DevOps, and much, much more. Whether it's their hands-on labs with personalized coaching or the online chat functions that come up with every instructor-led course, CBT Nuggets' team of experts is always there to help you get the most from your training and your path to certification. You can check it all out at cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast and sign up for a free trial. You get access to the full catalog of great training, including virtual labs, quizzes, and other premium features completely free for the first 7 days. That's cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. We continue to move through October here of 2021, another Sunday Perspective show. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, actually, I had another show in mind. I'm going to probably do it next week based on some feedback from KubeCon and some other things that were going on. But there was a couple of things that came out this week that I thought were sort of interesting. And again, sometimes I try and connect some dots between some things that are going on in the tech industry, some feedback we get from the audience, and so forth. And between some comments that I saw from friends of the show, Chris A., who runs CTO over at the CNCF, Rodrigo Flores, who's been a longtime friend of the show and guest of the show, the Apple M1 launch, and then some stuff I've been doing in my life and what we've been doing around the Cloudcast. It really got me thinking about kind of the difference between the challenge that we're seeing with a lot of folks in the tech industry who are, kind of getting worn down, in some cases burned out. It's been a challenging 18, 24 months, no matter, how long you've been sort of going through this pandemic, but the repetition is oftentimes the thing that sort of wears out folks in the tech industry, right? The repetition of doing the same thing over and over again, the same thing of, not seeing people, not having that human interaction, not, constantly having, Zoom calls and WebEx calls and team calls and video calls and long hours. And, not to sort of bemoan our industry. Lots of people have difficult jobs, and, ours tends to be, fairly flexible. But, the pandemic has really sort of changed things a little bit. And what I thought about was, one of the things that really tends to work for me, and I know it does for many others, is sometimes when you get in those repetitive modes, when you get into those ruts, you get into those things where you're kind of wearing out, is to go find something to be creative in. And I'm going to sort of balance this between being creative in the sense of going and learning something new, and creative in the sense of making something. And so what I kind of want to talk about this week is a little bit on the maker side of things, right? The creativity and sort of embracing your inner maker, if you will, and the value and the benefits of doing that. So I'm going to dive into that right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by PhoenixSnap, the global data center and infrastructure as a service company. Their bare metal cloud helps you automate server provisioning using API, CLI, or popular infrastructure as code tools. You can simplify your infrastructure management tasks and focus on your code to get it out fast. Bare Metal Cloud is simple to deploy, manage, and scale, with more than 20 advanced configurations that are available for near instant deployment, including servers with third-generation Intel Xeon scalable processors. You can choose between 6 global locations and get 15 terabytes of bandwidth for free. Leverage raw power of dedicated servers for cloud-like flexibility. Get Bare Metal Cloud today by visiting phoenixsnap.com/bare-metal-cloud for more details. That's phoenixsnap.com/bare-metal-cloud for more details. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to dive a little bit into this thread that I've been seeing. It's been going on for a few weeks, but sometimes there's some things that pop up in terms of announcements or just comments and threads that we see, conversations we see. And I really want to kind of dive into the benefits of again, like I mentioned, sort of embracing your inner maker qualities, your need and desire to make things, to create new things. And I want to do that in contrast. So, one of the things that we do on this show all the time, because we think it's a very good survival technique, and it helps people grow in their careers and helps them grow in their responsibilities and just kind of their knowledge of what's going on in our world, is kind of this sort of ongoing drumbeat that we have, that we talk about the importance of people constantly kind of having a learning mindset, having a mindset that the only constant in the IT industry and the technology industry is change. And so you really have to teach yourself, learn how to learn. And I was very fortunate. One of the very first jobs I had when I was working at Cisco, I was actually working in the technical support group. So the folks that picked up the phone when you called and you had a problem, was having to be responsible for a lot of different technologies. Right, we never knew who was going to call, when they were going to call. And one of the things that group instilled in us was, the need to learn how to learn, because at any given time, there will be 3 or 4 new things that come out, 5 or 6 new things that come out, different perspectives on stuff. And so you have to be able to learn how to learn. And learning is a fantastic part of what we do. It helps us grow as individuals and humans and groups and all these sort of things. But the process of learning is sort of unique in that it requires you to take up a good finite amount of time, a fixed amount of time, and oftentimes an unknown amount of time, depending on what you're learning. And it kind of stresses your brain and the way you think in a certain way, right? Because you oftentimes go into it with, you've got to learn context, you've got to learn the basics, you've got to learn, how things connect to each other, you've got to learn some history of, what got us to this point and so forth. And so learning, while it's incredibly important, can oftentimes be kind of a stressful thing, because you never know when you're going to make progress. You never know when you're going to sort of get over that next hurdle and the light bulb moment comes on. And so, learning, while it's incredibly important, and again, we don't sort of want to de-emphasize the importance of it, at least in our experience, is that, it oftentimes can be, it can wear on you, if you will. It's you're sort of fighting an uphill battle, and that's the nature of learning. And on the flip side of that is what we find oftentimes with the Cloudcast, and one of the reasons we keep doing the Cloudcast, we've been doing it for coming up on 11 years now, is it's a creative outlet. It's a making outlet, if you will. So while one of the forcing functions that we had in creating the Cloudcast was how to learn, we wanted to be able to tap into the brains of really smart people and learn from them. It helped us in our career, but we've been able to share that with you, and hopefully it's been able to help some of you. But probably more importantly, it's been a creative outlet. It allows us to come up with ways in which we can, share information. We can share expertise. It allows us to come up with creative ways to figure out what you like, listen to what you're saying. It allows us to experiment with stuff. Is this topic going to be interesting? Is that topic going to be interesting? What's an interesting way to let more and more people know about it? How do we make it simpler? And so there's an element of it that is learning, but there's also probably equally as important an element of it that is trying to create something, trying to make something. And what I find is that, as monotonous as any given job I might have, or any period of time for a job becomes, I've always been able to use the Cloudcast as something that is an offset, and it allows me to sort of bring some of that creator, that maker mindset into my day-to-day, because as we all know, it's becoming more and more kind of a blur between what's your day job, what's your life, what you do with your friends, your family, your interests, and so forth. And I think it's really important to find some balances, right? It's very easy to have your work consume everything, especially as we're doing, more and more where we don't see people as often. I mean, we're not going back into the office, and we're not going to trade shows and events. We're not, we're doing phone calls with for colleagues and customers and markets at all hours of the day. So, it's really, really important, I think, as much as we again, beat that drum of, make sure you're making some time for learning. I think it's just important to make some time for creating. And, there was a couple of things I saw, as I think about just other people that we've known, even in the Cloudcast industry, and many of you know this in whatever thing you do to create, whether you're, doing woodworking in a garage, or whether you're, creating some sort of art, or you're creating some sort of digital content, or you're creating whatever. One of the great things about this is, right now people struggle because they're not seeing people nearly as much, but in these maker communities, you're oftentimes interacting with people, and people tend to come together in much more positive ways, right? I think in our tech industry, sometimes we tend to get on Reddit or Hacker News or some other forum or even a Slack channel or whatever, and it tends to get kind of negative fairly quick. It could be Twitter, it could be whatever. People like to complain about what's going on. They become a venting place. In these maker communities, and I'm not talking necessarily just about Maker Faire, but anywhere where you're making things and you're working with other people, they tend to be positive. I repeat, this is something people choose to do. This is something people are oftentimes investing their own money in. It's a hobby or whatever. And they're trying to be positive about it. They're willing to share tips. They're trying to help each other overcome a hurdle they're going through and so forth. And so in terms of, this need that we all have to stay interactive with people, to find some positivity when things might seem negative and so forth. That's the other great thing about these communities is you're making things, which gives you a sense of pride and a sense of curiosity and a sense of learning and, in many cases a sense of failure, but you sort of balance that success and failure, but you're doing it with other people. And I think that's a really important thing, especially the positivity that comes out of that. I mentioned, our friend Rodrigo Flores. Rodrigo is somebody who we've had on the show many, many times. He's just one of the people who I think has a really, really good perspective. He's able to step back and view things, but he's also somebody who's, created many things. Started his own companies. He's led, huge operations at places like Accenture, their cloud operations, and he's now doing some other very, very cool stuff. But he made an interesting comment about the Apple M1 chip, and we don't typically cover sort of the Apple news. There's plenty of interesting shows that cover the Apple stuff. Our friends at Software Defined Talk do it, and Daring Fireball, and Dithering Podcast, and lots of others if you're really into the Apple stuff. But he made an interesting comment about the M1 Plus, the M1 Pro. And it sort of stuck out at me because what Rodrigo is very, very good at doing is sort of seeing trends as they're coming, and he's sort of very good at seeing inflection points. And one of the things that he notices, he said, the techies tend to look at this new MacBook that came out and they think, oh, it's over-engineered, it's got way too many ports, it's got too much stuff in it, it's too expensive, it won't be great for me. But what he really highlighted is that we've reached a tipping point, right? This when somebody like Apple, who makes things for the masses, does incredible work and really creative stuff, but does things for the masses. What this really says is that at least in the digital creator side of things, or people who are creating digital content, and that content may not be necessarily about digital stuff, right? They could be making stuff about a sport that they love, or a hobby that they love, or arts, or whatever it might be. This is really a recognition that is a major class of people. This is really, designed and optimized and targeting that creator community, that set of creator people. And the reason I bring this up is not to sort of get into, whether it's a great machine or not a great machine. I think he's right that we're very much reaching a tipping point in terms of the creator community, which, the thing that's really interesting to me is while there's a part of that community that's very professionally driven, right? Their job is to do that. They're making money at it. But there's also, a ton of people that do it as a hobby. And again, we started this podcast as a hobby, and I spend a decent amount of time, watching things on YouTube and other places where people are using their creativity. And now the access to the tools to be able to do this, and we've talked about this before on the show if you've listened for a long time, the tools that were available to us 10 years ago, 5 years ago, for us to make a podcast or for us to make video feeds or, streaming with Twitch or, whatever other thing that people are using, have become so much more mainstream, so much easier to use, so much more interoperable and so forth. And so, again, it's really important to watch sometimes, this intersection of, people needing a reason to be creative. I think it's good for mental health, especially. But the tools available to us are now much more affordable, much more readily available. The communities around them are much more readily available and building and so forth. And the last thing I'll say, and this was another comment that I saw from I mentioned Chris A., who's the CTO at the CNCF. And Chris, I apologize, I would have butchered your last name, but it's at CRA on Twitter. So for folks that follow Chris, he made an interesting comment. He said, I'm seeing a lot of people who, feel like they're fairly burned out in around his circles in tech. And Chris interacts with a lot of different people because of the role that he's in and all the different groups that interact around the CNCF. And he said, I think there's a big need, a big opportunity for the companies that people are working for to be cognizant of this, especially going into 2022 as you're setting up your programs for people to be successful and benefits and mental health days and all this sort of stuff. And the reason I sort of mentioned that comment from him is, I think more than anything, this is an opportunity if you go to your company and you say, hey, I want to do something creative, right? Like I'm doing some monotonous things and I want to do some things that are creative. And again, keep in mind, it's rare that you ever get to 100%, shift or move what you do. But oftentimes companies, especially if you have a plan, are very open to you doing creative things, to you, be reaching out and not only growing that experience, but growing your ability to become good at it and make it part of what you do and extend the longevity of how long you stay in a job or within an organization, but also grow you, become a more valuable person in multiple ways. So I think it's sort of interesting that we're seeing this to a certain extent. You could say it's a chaotic moment or a crisis moment, because of kind of the byproduct of the pandemic and so forth. But the flip side of it is the ability to create, to be creative, to be a maker has never been easier. And the ability to reach out to communities of people who are doing similar things, and it could be anything. It really could be sort of anything. Has never been bigger. So take advantage of the opportunity if you can. If you have some creative juices that you want to take advantage of. And I'll throw out one last thing as we wrap up. One of the things that I've been doing, I've got a trip coming up. One of the first trips I've made in a really long time. I'm going out to Oregon to play some golf. And for those of you that don't care about sports, don't worry. This analogy has nothing to do with sports. But what was interesting to me is the gentleman who started this place. It's called Bandon Dunes. It's out in Oregon. Was a golfer, but it was a hobby to him. And then at some point he decided, I need a creative outlet. He was running a company. He ran a company called Recycled Paper Goods or Recycled Paper Greetings. He was in the greeting card business. So they made greeting cards out of recycled things. His name was Mike Kaiser. Interesting guy. And I've been reading the book. It's called Making a Bandon Dunes. And what's been interesting to me is to sort of watch somebody else who created something completely out of his field, and really took a lot of chances. How did he go about coming up with the idea? How did he come about being steadfast in his desire to create, but to stumble, to have problems along the way? And it's a really interesting book in that concept of, how did somebody get from something that was sort of a side passion for them, a hobby for them, to something that, they reached some moments in their life when they said, I want this to be more than that. And then how did they go about, sort of setting a huge vision for what it could be? And again, not everything needs to be a huge vision, but in this case, it was a pretty big vision. It was something that, he said everybody told him was crazy. He shouldn't be doing. He shouldn't be wasting his time. You're going to lose all your money, and all sorts of things like that. And he was just determined. He had this sort of inner need to create within him, and get satisfaction out of that creation process, not the, accumulation of wealth or, building a business anymore. It was something else in him that had to be creative. So that's been something I've been reading lately. It's been, a good balance to what goes on in tech. And, I encourage everybody who, has any opportunity to do it, create something. Find a way to create something, and it doesn't have to be enormous. It can be tiny. It can just give you personal satisfaction. Nobody else needs to know about it. But, we're at an interesting time. Sometimes we reach some interesting inflection points. And I think, the ability for people to use creativity as a counterbalance to learning, or as a counterbalance to, monotony and sort of repetitiveness, is a really good way to start to find some different balances. And so I highly encourage it. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this week's Cloud News, or this week's Sunday Perspective show. We'll be back again on Wednesday with a really interesting interview. One of the things that you've all asked for is let us talk to the real practitioners. Well, we're really going to dive into that on Wednesday's show. So again, be creative. I highly encourage it. It's a great outlet. It's a great balance point. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for telling a friend about the show. Thanks for helping us grow the community. We've continued to grow throughout this year, which has been great, especially as people change their listening habits and all the other podcasts and other creative outlets that you have out there. We thank you all for continuing to stick with us and continuing to tell your friends and help us grow. And again, any chance you get to give us a 5-star rating on Apple, Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast, helps us grow the show, helps us get feedback about what's going on. And most importantly, if you've got feedback, show@thecloudcast.net. We've been getting some really interesting sets of feedback lately. We really appreciate it. We always encourage it. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.